How to improve your English. Leo often found himself in a familiar predicament. He deeply desired to master English, to speak with fluidity and confidence, but a persistent shadow of fear loomed large. Every potential conversation felt like a daunting mountain, an insurmountable obstacle that threatened to expose his perceived linguistic shortcomings. He longed for effortless communication, yet hesitation consistently held him captive. This internal battle was exhausting. The primary hurdle, he constantly admitted, was his profound aversion to making errors. "I don't want to make mistake," he would whisper to himself, correcting the very phrase in his mind immediately. This self-correction, while useful, became a paralyzing force. It stifled any natural inclination to simply open his mouth and let words flow freely, transforming every interaction into a stressful linguistic minefield of potential blunders. This fear permeated his daily life, especially when he considered joining online English conversation groups or even attempting to chat with tourists. The thought of stumbling over words, mispronouncing a common phrase, or completely forgetting vocabulary sent shivers down his spine. He imagined judgmental glances and polite but pitying smiles, reinforcing his reluctance to engage in spontaneous discourse. Confidence remained a distant dream. One evening, while scrolling through language learning forums, a simple, yet profound, piece of advice caught his eye: start talking at home. It seemed almost too simple, too obvious, yet the idea resonated deeply within him. Could it be that the solution to his speaking paralysis lay not in public performance, but in the quiet, judgment-free confines of his own living room? The concept was revolutionary for Leo. He had always associated speaking practice with formal classes or actual conversations with native speakers. The notion of engaging in self-talk, of holding imaginary dialogues with himself, felt unconventional, almost silly even. But desperation was a powerful motivator, and the promise of a safe space to practice slowly began to chip away at his entrenched anxieties. He decided to give it a try. The first attempt felt incredibly awkward. Standing in front of his mirror, he tried to describe his day. Words caught in his throat, sentences felt clunky, and his pronunciation seemed to betray every effort. He mumbled, he hesitated, and he felt a blush creep up his neck. It was far from fluent, but it was a start. "I don't want make mistake, but I always why," he articulated, slowly at first, then gaining a tiny bit of momentum. The truth was, every time he tried, mistakes did surface. Grammatical errors, forgotten articles, incorrect verb tenses, they were all there, staring back at him from his own reflection. It felt disheartening, a stark reminder of his current limitations. Yet, there was a subtle difference this time. Nobody was judging him. There were no raised eyebrows, no impatient sighs. Only his own reflection, an honest but silent witness to his struggle. This lack of external pressure allowed a small, hesitant spark of curiosity to ignite. Perhaps these mistakes weren't failures, but simply data points in his learning journey. The forum also emphasized another crucial component: how to improve your listening skills. Leo realized his speaking struggles were deeply intertwined with his comprehension. If he couldn't fully understand what was being said, how could he possibly respond effectively and naturally? Listening, it seemed, was not just a passive reception of sound, but an active foundation for speech. He started dedicating specific time each day to active listening. This wasn't just background noise. It was focused, deliberate engagement. He chose materials that genuinely interested him, from podcasts on history to documentaries about nature. The goal was to absorb not just words, but also intonation, rhythm, and the natural flow of spoken English, especially focusing on British accents. "Let's talk in British English" became his silent mantra. He was fascinated by the diverse accents and pronunciations of British English, from the clear articulation of RP to the more regional variations. He sought out specific BBC programs, audiobooks read by British narrators, and even YouTube channels featuring everyday conversations among British people. His ear began to attune itself. He incorporated this into his home practice. After listening to a segment, he would pause it and try to mimic the speaker's intonation and phrasing. This shadowing technique felt awkward initially, but it was incredibly effective. He wasn't just repeating words. He was trying to capture the very essence of how native speakers modulated their voices, their emphasis, their rhythm. How to talk at home to yourself became a daily ritual. He started with simple self-introductions, then moved to describing his surroundings, narrating his actions, or even expressing his opinions on news articles he'd read. The bathroom mirror became his most patient and non-judgmental conversational partner, always ready to receive his latest linguistic attempts without complaint. He started small, as advised by the start step-by-step talking principle. No grand speeches, no complex debates. Just short, manageable bursts of English. Maybe 5 minutes of describing his breakfast, then 10 minutes of explaining his plans for the day. Each small step built a tiny brick in the foundation of his evolving confidence, bit by bit. He learned to embrace the awkwardness. It was okay if his sentences weren't perfect, if he paused too long, or if he searched for words. The goal was not perfection, but consistent effort. He reminded himself that even native speakers sometimes stumble or rephrase their thoughts. The pressure he put on himself was largely self-imposed and unnecessary for genuine progress. Why you should practice speaking became vividly clear through this consistent home exercise. It wasn't just about outputting words. It was about training his brain to think in English, to retrieve vocabulary and grammar structures instinctively. Each speaking session, no matter how brief or flawed, strengthened those neural pathways, making the process smoother over time. His listening skills also saw remarkable improvement. Why you must listen, he now understood, was because it provided the necessary input for his speaking output. It filled his internal linguistic reservoir with new words, idiomatic expressions, and correct grammatical patterns. The more he listened, the richer his internal library of English became, ready for retrieval. The initial frustration of "why I always make mistakes" slowly began to dissipate. He started viewing mistakes not as failures, but as invaluable feedback. Each grammatical slip or mispronounced word became a signal, pointing directly to an area that required more attention or a concept he needed to review. Mistakes were no longer roadblocks, they were signposts. He kept a small notebook, jotting down common errors he noticed during his self-talk sessions. Later, he would research the correct usage or pronunciation. This active engagement with his mistakes transformed them from sources of embarrassment into tools for targeted learning, making his study sessions far more efficient and directly relevant to his personal areas of difficulty. Leo realized that the journey to fluency wasn't a sprint, but a marathon. There were days when he felt energized and eloquent, and other days when he felt like he hadn't made any progress at all. But he learned to trust the process, to understand that consistent effort, even small daily steps, accumulated into significant long-term gains over time. The shift in his mindset was perhaps the most crucial development. He moved from "I don't want to make mistake" to "it's okay to make mistakes, because that's how I learn." This fundamental change liberated him from the self-imposed prison of perfectionism, allowing him to experiment with language, to play with words, and to truly enjoy the learning process. His British English aspiration remained strong. He continued to immerse himself in British media, paying close attention to nuanced differences in vocabulary: lift instead of elevator, flat instead of apartment, loo instead of restroom. These small distinctions delighted him and made his self-practice feel more authentic to his chosen accent. He was meticulous. He even started practicing different British accents to himself, not for perfection, but for exposure and fun. He'd try to imitate a Scottish lilt or a London Cockney cadence, just for the challenge. This playful approach reduced the pressure and made the entire process more engaging and less like a tedious chore. Learning became an adventure. The combination of active listening and consistent self-talk began to yield tangible results. He noticed that words he'd only recognized passively in his listening exercises now came to mind more readily during his speaking attempts. His brain was making connections, building bridges between input and output, solidifying his understanding and recall of vocabulary. He started narrating his daily activities in his head, almost like a running commentary. "I am making tea now. I need to boil the kettle. The milk is in the fridge." This constant internal dialogue, though silent, was a powerful form of mental practice, keeping his English active and preventing it from becoming rusty even during periods of non-speaking. The fear of public speaking, though not entirely gone, had significantly diminished. He had built up a reservoir of confidence from countless hours of private practice. He knew he could speak, even if imperfectly. The internal voice of doubt that once screamed now merely whispered, easily overcome by his newfound self-assurance, a quiet revolution within. One day, a colleague unexpectedly asked him about his weekend plans, and Leo, instead of defaulting to his native tongue, found himself responding in English. It wasn't perfect, there were pauses, but the words flowed. A genuine conversation unfolded, unforced and unscripted. He felt a surge of exhilaration, a small victory in his linguistic conquest. He later reflected on that conversation. The mistakes were still there, yes, but they hadn't crippled him. They were just part of the communication process, easily understood and overlooked by his attentive colleague. The message had been conveyed, and that was what truly mattered. The pursuit of absolute perfection had finally been replaced by the goal of effective communication. This experience solidified his belief in the power of why you should practice speaking. It wasn't just theoretical advice. It was a proven pathway to real-world application. Each moment spent practicing, whether at home or in front of a mirror, was an investment that yielded returns in spontaneous, meaningful interactions. The effort was truly worth it. He began to actively seek out opportunities to speak English, no longer shying away from them. He joined an online book club that discussed British literature, allowing him to practice both his listening and speaking skills in a semi-formal, supportive environment. The specific context of British English motivated him even further, deepening his immersion. His listening skills continued to sharpen. He could now distinguish subtle nuances in regional British accents that he had previously missed. Conversations no longer felt like a blur of fast-paced words, but rather a discernible stream of sounds he could effectively process and understand. His ear had become finely tuned, a testament to his dedication. Why you must listen became an intuitive understanding. It wasn't a chore, but a gateway. The more he listened, the more natural the rhythms of English became, the more effortless his comprehension. It provided the mental framework for his own speaking, shaping his pronunciation and intonation patterns, making them sound more authentic and natural to native ears. The fear of why I always make mistakes was now almost entirely gone. He understood that mistakes were an unavoidable part of the learning curve, not a sign of failure. They were simply indicators that he was pushing his boundaries, testing his knowledge, and actively engaging with the language. Each error was a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. He would occasionally record himself speaking, then listen back. This self-assessment, though sometimes cringeworthy, was incredibly insightful. It allowed him to identify specific pronunciation issues or repetitive grammatical errors that he might otherwise miss. It was a brutal but honest mirror, reflecting areas for improvement with undeniable clarity. His focus on "let's talk in British English" gave his learning a clear direction and specific goals. Instead of trying to master all English accents, he concentrated his efforts, allowing him to achieve a noticeable improvement in his chosen area. This specificity made the journey less overwhelming and more rewarding, providing a tangible benchmark for his progress. He realized that consistency trumped intensity. 10 minutes of focused practice every day yielded far greater results than a 2-hour session once a week. Start step-by-step talking wasn't just a suggestion, it was the golden rule for sustained progress. Small, regular efforts built momentum, creating an unstoppable habit of continuous improvement. The concept of how to talk at home to yourself transformed from a quirky idea into a powerful cornerstone of his English journey. It provided an accessible, zero-cost, and endlessly patient platform for unlimited practice. There was no need to schedule, no need to feel embarrassed, just the freedom to explore language at his own pace. Leo even started talking to his plants in English, describing their growth, complimenting their leaves. It sounds absurd, but it provided yet another low-pressure outlet for active language production. His cat, Misha, became his most frequent listener, enduring countless monologues about catnip and the mysteries of the universe, all delivered in his increasingly confident English. The journey wasn't linear. There were plateaus where he felt his progress stalled, and moments of frustration where old doubts resurfaced. But he had learned resilience. He reminded himself of how far he had come, recalling the initial fear and awkwardness that had once paralyzed him. He had transformed, inch by painful, glorious inch. He understood now that how to improve your English wasn't a single magical trick, but a mosaic of consistent habits. Speaking, listening, embracing mistakes, and practicing daily were all interconnected pieces of a larger puzzle. Each piece reinforced the others, creating a robust and self-sustaining learning ecosystem, driving him forward relentlessly. The initial anxiety surrounding "I don't want to make mistake, but I always why" had evaporated almost entirely. He no longer feared mistakes. He welcomed them. They were indicators of growth, proof that he was pushing his boundaries. The learning curve was bumpy, but every bump taught him something invaluable, propelling him closer to his aspirations. His listening skills were now sharp enough that he could easily follow complex British news broadcasts without subtitles, something that once seemed utterly impossible. He could catch regional accents, understand various turns of phrase, and appreciate the humor in British comedy shows. His world had expanded, enriched by clear comprehension. Why you should practice speaking had manifested in countless unexpected ways. He found himself more confident in professional settings, able to contribute to discussions with international colleagues. His social circle broadened as he comfortably interacted with English speakers, enjoying rich conversations about diverse topics. Speaking opened new doors for him. He became an ardent advocate for listening. Why you must listen, he would tell fellow learners, is because it builds the internal database your brain needs to generate accurate and natural speech. It's the fuel for your spoken engine. He understood its indispensable role in language acquisition, a truth he wished he had grasped sooner. The mantra, "start step by step talking," remained his guiding principle. He never rushed the process, celebrating every small victory, every newly mastered phrase, every conversation that flowed more smoothly than the last. Patience and persistence were his steadfast companions on this remarkable linguistic adventure, ensuring steady, sustainable progress. His initial goal of "let's talk in British English" had been largely achieved. While he still had room for refinement, he could now confidently hold conversations with native British speakers, discuss topics of mutual interest, and even crack a few jokes using British idioms. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, a personal triumph. The quiet, solitary practice of how to talk at home to yourself had forged the foundational strength for his public speaking confidence. It was in those private moments, free from scrutiny, that he experimented, stumbled, corrected, and ultimately built the muscle memory and mental agility required for spontaneous communication, brick by brick. Leo's transformation was a testament to the power of consistent self-belief and smart practice. He had moved from a state of paralyzing fear to one of liberating fluency. The English language, once a source of anxiety, had become a beloved tool for connection, exploration, and self-expression, unlocking new dimensions of his life. He often looked back at his initial fears about making mistakes and chuckled. The very thing he had dreaded had become his greatest teacher. Each error was a lesson, each stumble a step forward. He now knew that genuine progress wasn't about avoiding mistakes, but about learning from them with an open mind and a determined spirit. His journey illustrated that improving English wasn't about innate talent, but about dedicated effort. Anyone could achieve fluency if they approached it systematically, embraced practice, and let go of the crippling fear of imperfection. His story was a living example of what consistent, targeted action could truly achieve over time. He now found joy in the process, not just the outcome. The act of speaking, listening, and learning had become an integral and enjoyable part of his daily routine. English was no longer a subject to be conquered, but a living, breathing entity to be explored and enjoyed, offering endless possibilities for growth and discovery. And so, Leo continued his English journey, forever a learner, but now a confident and articulate one. He knew the path was endless, with new vocabulary to acquire and new nuances to master. But he walked it with enthusiasm, armed with the wisdom that true fluency comes not from perfection, but from persistent, courageous participation.